"You're a disgrace to this family," my father said, but I just smiled, because now I own all their property. My jacket was barely dry from the early spring rain when the patriarch of the Winthrop clan leaned back in his carved mahogany throne and scoffed, "You look like the help." I smiled, because I had spent more than 2 decades dreaming of standing in that room. A gilt chandelier flickered overhead, scattering nervous shadows across the family portraits. Emerald drapes muffled the city outside, leaving only the hushed ticking of a grandfather clock, 12 solemn beats marking my arrival. To them I was a stranger in an off-the-rack suit, a consultant hired by an unseen investor. To me, they were the ghosts who had never bothered to haunt my childhood. Faces I knew from careful newspaper clippings and forgotten charity galas. Faces that had once glanced at a bundled infant and decided he did not fit their Christmas tableau. "State your business," barked Charles Winthrop, silver moustache bristling. His wife Eleanor shifted in her chair, diamond bracelets whispering disapproval. Around the walnut table lounged their lineage, smug cousin Victor twirling a gold pen, thin-lipped Aunt Margaret inspecting her manicure, twins Olivia and Grace tapping bright heels beneath silk gowns, too loud for mourning. "My business," I said, placing a slim leather folder on the table, "is preserving your fortune." Truth tasted sweet and poisonous on my tongue, because every word was technically true, just not in the way they assumed. Inside that folder lay projections engineered to soothe them, yet each arrow, each percentage, pointed toward a cliff only I could see. Margaret gave a brittle laugh. "We already employ the finest advisors money can buy. Why should we trust you?" I met her eyes without blinking. "Because the people you trust hired me." Not a lie, my shell company held majority shares in their crumbling empire. They merely had not traced the ownership far enough. Charles drummed thick fingers against the table. "Background?" "Oxford," I answered. "Economics. Then 8 years with Meridian Equity in London. 3 with Northern Horizons in Chicago." He grunted approval at recognizable names, never noticing the gaps where my childhood should have been. No boarding school, no prep academy, no family pedigree, nothing to betray a boy who learned arithmetic by counting ceiling cracks in a state orphanage. A single memory pierced like sleet. Fluorescent dormitory lights, the sour scent of bleach, a nurse whispering, "He was left with no note, poor thing." I was 5, perhaps 6, though numbers blur when no one celebrates your birthday. That night, I promised the ceiling I would carve my own name in stone, even if I had to borrow a chisel from the devil. Back in the present, Grace yawned. "Can we wrap this up? I have a lunch fitting." Charles waved her off, but fixed me with narrowed eyes. "All right, mister. Lawson, was it? Draft a proposal. Show me where you think we bleed." "Gladly." I retrieved the folder, snapping it shut. They leaned back, satisfied, unaware I had already mapped each secret artery. Leveraged properties, delayed shipments, overvalued patents. Every weakness ripe for harvest. As I turned to leave, Victor muttered, "Next time wear something decent. Winthrops expect Polish." I paused at the doorway, rainwater still darkening my cuffs. Over my shoulder I said softly, "Polish is only noticeable when the silver has tarnished." His smirk faltered. The corridor outside smelled of lemon wax and entitlement. Portraits tracked me with oil-painted eyes, but I knew the one face missing, my mother, who had scrubbed their marble floors before vanishing from every ledger. I felt her absence like a second heartbeat. At the mansion's entrance, Halliday, the longtime butler, offered my coat. He was older, slower, yet his gaze lingered on mine as though remembering a barefoot boy who once hid behind service carts. His lips parted, perhaps to ask a question, but duty won, and he bowed instead. I stepped into a drizzle that tasted of metal and memory. The hired car idled at the curb. As I slid into the back seat, I caught my reflection in the window, rain running down glass like tears I refused to shed. I whispered the names of the people behind me, the way a surgeon might recite bones before an incision. Then, just loud enough for the driver to hear, I said, "Home, please." "Which address, sir?" I watched the Winthrop mansion shrink behind us, its turrets piercing a grey sky like broken promises. "The one they forgot they owned," I replied. The driver pulled away. In my lap lay a second folder, thicker, heavier, sealed with a trembling rubber band. Inside were adoption records, bank transfers, photographs of a young couple smiling stiffly before handing a baby to social services. At the bottom, a single, freshly notarized page, transfer of ownership, Winthrop Holdings, contingent on insolvency triggers I had designed myself. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the river. I closed my eyes and let it echo through the hollow places their absence had carved. Vengeance was not a flame, it was rain, steady and patient, finding every crack in the stone. And tonight it had begun to pour. The train rattled east through pale dawn, and every sway of the carriage dredged up another shard of a childhood spent trying to stay small. I remembered damp walls the colour of dishwater, rows of metal beds that creaked whenever a boy rolled over, and Sister Judith pacing the aisle with her lantern, sniffing for whispered secrets. We were told hope was a flame that ate its own oxygen, best kept low, so I fed mine breadcrumbs of possibility and hid the glow beneath my ribs. In those days I was simply Boy 7, a number pinned to a laundry roster. But numbers blur when no one calls your name, and by the winter I turned, well, I cannot swear which year, my real birthday felt like a rumour. What anchored me were moments. The rustle of adoption papers sliding across Sister Judith's desk, the hiss of her breath when she realised I was standing in the doorway. I saw the name Winthrop stamped in heavy ink, a name I had only heard when the town mayor posed for photographs after donating surplus blankets. And beneath it, in smaller print, a checkmark beside the word relinquished. That night I lay awake listening to rain chase itself across the tin roof. I said the word Winthrop the way other boys whispered forbidden prayers, rolling it on my tongue until it lost meaning and became pure sound, wind, rope, wrath. By morning I had made a decision far too large for a child. If they could cast me off like an ill-fitting suit, I would tailor myself into something they could never ignore again. Leaving the orphanage was not heroic. I simply aged out, traded my bunk for a one-room bedsit in a city whose streets smelled of diesel and burnt sugar. I waited tables at a diner where truckers tipped in nickels and advice. Between graveyard shifts, I studied loan amortization schedules under flickering fluorescent lights, teaching myself why some men drown in debt while others glide atop it like skaters on black ice. I learned that money is not a fortress but a fluid. Pour it in the right direction and even stone will erode. Community college came next, then a scholarship some donor would later regret. I sat in lecture halls beside gilded freshmen who treated knowledge like hors d'oeuvres, nibbling before tossing the plate. I devoured textbooks whole, memorized case studies, and practiced the silent art of being underestimated. Professors praised my diligence. Classmates mocked my threadbare coat. Their laughter reminded me of the Winthrops' ballroom echoes, so I pocketed every slight the way a priest pockets wafers. One day they would become communion for a different kind of service. The break arrived during a summer internship at Meridian Equity in London. I uncovered a ledger error that would have cost the firm millions. Instead of a pat on the head, I asked for a seat at the next strategy meeting. They gave me 5 minutes, I used 3, and by the time the elevator doors closed behind me, the partners were whispering my name like stock symbols. Within 2 years I was their quiet scalpel, slicing failing subsidiaries free before rot could spread. But each triumph left an aftertaste of iron, because victory meant nothing until it pointed home. Home, such a tender word for a place that never wanted me, yet the Winthrop Holdings mapped neatly onto the very weaknesses I had spent my 20s diagnosing. Over-leveraged real estate ventures in gentrifying districts, patent disputes tied up in arbitration, a vanity vineyard hemorrhaging cash. Their empire was a mansion propped on termite wings, and all I needed was the deed to one forgotten cellar door. I built a shell company, then another nested inside it, like Russian dolls carved from shadow. Capital trickled through tax havens until it no longer bore fingerprints. By the time I bought my first tranche of Winthrop debt, the family saw only a faceless creditor offering lifelines at respectable rates. They never noticed how each lifeline looped back toward the same unseen hand. Still, numbers alone could not satisfy the ache. I wanted them to look me in the eye and feel a flicker of recognition, that primal tremor when something you discarded rises from the landfill wearing a crown. So I booked a consultation under the name Jacob Lawson, close enough to truth to thrill me, far enough to keep them blind. Now, riding the train toward the city where my past lay entombed in marble and hypocrisy, I unfolded a weathered photograph. A woman, my mother, stood in a maid's uniform beside a fountain, whose spray caught the light like scattered diamonds. She was smiling, but her eyes held the resigned grace of someone who knows her joy is borrowed time. On the back, in smudged ink, she had written only 2 words, "Come home." I slipped the photo into the inside pocket of my suit just as the train brakes screeched. Steel wheels sparked, and with them a memory. Sister Judith once told me saints are merely sinners who kept going. I wondered which I had become. Stepping onto the platform, I inhaled the city's metallic breath and felt the old promise ignite. The Winthrops would soon discover that forgetting a child is not the same as erasing him. I headed for the waiting car, rain beginning to fall, soft, relentless, inevitable. A marble corridor can swallow secrets if you walk softly enough, and I had mastered that art. Each morning I arrived before dawn, sliding past sleepy security guards who never questioned the man with the visitor badge that granted him everywhere. The Winthrop headquarters glittered like a cathedral of commerce, all chrome edges and floor-to-ceiling glass, but underneath the polish I could almost hear girders groaning with decay. My job was to loosen a single bolt at a time until the whole edifice sighed and settled into my open palms. First came the vineyard. Olivia's pet project bled money faster than summer sun could ripen a grape. I drafted a restructuring memo peppered with comforting jargon, vertical integration, asset realignment, long-term liquidity, and watched her eyes glaze with relief. She signed every page. 2 days later, a shell corporation I controlled purchased the vineyard's land for a song. She thanked me for saving the family legacy, never noticing that the deed now bore my name. Next, I targeted Victor, whose ego needed constant infusions of prestige. I arranged a meeting with a tech startup desperate for capital, staged in a penthouse brimming with panoramic skyline views. Victor swaggered in, charmed by prototypes blinking like Christmas toys, and agreed to a bridge loan under terms I had quietly poisoned. The ink was barely dry when the startup declared bankruptcy and defaulted on the loan, leaving Victor owing compensation to the very creditor who had underwritten the deal. That creditor, of course, was one of my shadows. Victor's howl echoed through the boardroom while I offered condolences and a revised payment schedule. He clasped my hand with gratitude, unaware I held both ends of the rope. But it was Eleanor who nearly sensed the current beneath the calm. She cornered me in the library, perfume thick with suspicion. "You handle our finances like a surgeon," she said, fingertips grazing a row of first editions. "Yet a surgeon wears a name we can trace. Who taught you to cut so clean?" The question fluttered inside me like a trapped moth. I answered with half a smile. "Experience, Mrs. Winthrop, and a steady hand." She studied my face, as though memory might flicker behind her gaze. I held her stare until she blinked first. That night, rain drummed the office windows while I sifted through ledgers older than my resentment. Hidden in footnotes lay proof of bribes paid to silence adoption whispers, compensation for a child who never officially existed. My fingers trembled as I scanned the dates, only because I could picture Sister Judith's lantern swinging down that orphanage aisle, casting bars of light that never reached my bed. I folded the documents and slid them into a burn-proof envelope. Evidence, yes, but also testament. Words can bury a life, yet words can resurrect it. Days blurred into weeks. Each signed contract, each silent acquisition, tightened the cord around the family fortune. Still, revenge was not ablaze. It was frost creeping across glass, delicate and inevitable. And frost, if unnoticed, can shatter stone. One Friday afternoon, Charles summoned the clan to the top-floor conference suite. I arrived early, positioned myself by the window overlooking the river, and let the hushed city sprawl beneath my reflection. My pulse stirred, not with fear, but anticipation so sharp it glittered. When they filed in, Grace first, clacking her bright heels, then Margaret clutching a pearl brooch, then the twins whispering behind manicured hands, the air thickened with unspoken dread. Charles closed the door with a hollow thud. "We have a crisis," he announced, tossing a stack of reports onto the table. Red ink bled across the pages like open wounds. Olivia gasped. Victor swore. Grace demanded to know who had approved the vineyard sale, who had signed off on the tech deal, who had missed the balloon payments looming like storm clouds. All eyes swung toward me, the quiet stranger who had whispered strategies while Rome burned. I kept my expression serene. Charles's cheeks flushed crimson as he jabbed a finger in my direction. "Lawson, fix this or I will end your career before sunset." Career. A curious threat to level at a man who had invented himself out of thin air. I inclined my head. "With respect, sir, the fixes are already in motion. You will see the details at Monday's investor briefing." He blustered, but the others clung to the promise like sailors to driftwood. They did not notice the tremor in Eleanor's hand as she poured water, or the way Margaret avoided my gaze entirely. When the meeting dissolved, I lingered by the window. The river below looked calm, yet currents tugged relentless beneath the surface. I pressed my palm to the glass, tracing unseen ripples, and whispered, "Home." The word fogged against the cold pane before fading, as if the building itself inhaled my vow. Behind me, footsteps approached. Halliday's voice, soft with decades of discretion, said, "Master Jacob, forgive me, but your eyes, they remind me of someone I once knew." I turned. The old butler's back was stooped, yet his gaze held the weight of untold stories. My heart stuttered. "Perhaps a coincidence," I murmured. He bowed slightly, but his whisper followed me out. "Coincidences often carry the shape of truth." I walked the hallway alone, shoes muffled by plush carpet, and felt the mansion shiver around me. It knew, even if its owners did not, that a forgotten child had found the fuse box. All that remained was to flip the final switch and watch darkness bloom into revelation. Morning headlines hit like stones against stained glass. "Mystery adoptee now controls Winthrop fortune." The gossip sheet lay open across my desk, syllables dripping insinuation. Someone had dug past shell companies, brushed aside aliases, and found the birth name I thought buried beneath a decade of paperwork. My pulse fluttered, half fear, half exhilaration. Exposure could sharpen the blade or snap it. I needed to know which. I slid the newspaper into a drawer just as soft knuckles tapped the office door. Olivia stepped inside, face pale beneath impeccable makeup. She held a digital tablet, every pixel oozing that same headline, but her voice shook with something older than scandal. "Jacob," she whispered, "is it true? Are you family?" Silence stretched, taut as piano wire. I had rehearsed denials, polished excuses, yet none fit the cracked porcelain of her expression. So I answered the way a wound answers salt. "I was family once, before you learned how to pronounce legacy." Her lower lip trembled. Memories flickered behind her gaze. Summer afternoons when a shy foster boy trailed her through rose gardens, small hand clutching a wooden plane. She whispered, "They told me you were placed elsewhere, that you were happy." Tears rimmed her lashes, and for a breath, the ice around my heart groaned. But then I recalled Father's voice branding me expendable, while chandelier light danced on polished shoes. The ice held. "I am happy," I said. "Happiness simply costs more than it used to." I expected anger, yet she reached for my hand. Her skin was warm, alive with apology. "Tell me what you want," she pleaded. "We can fix this together." I almost laughed. Want? I wanted time rewound, a mother unburied, a boy spared from catalogue labels. None of that fit tidy balance sheets. I drew my hand away. "You cannot mend bones already powdered to dust." Olivia's shoulders slumped as though those words turned gravity heavier. She left without another plea, closing the door so softly it felt like regret breathing. Their mansion loomed duskward, windows glimmering despite rain. I drove there on impulse, tires crunching gravel older than my abandonment. Halliday answered before I knocked, as if he had been waiting. No questions, just a slight bow and a lantern lifted to guide me down a servant's corridor that smelled of citrus wax and forgotten prayers. He paused beside a narrow door under the eaves. "Your room," he murmured. My throat closed. The space was smaller than memory, cot stripped bare, wallpaper peeled into faded constellations. A single dusty toy plane lay on the sill, wings chipped. I brushed a finger across it, and grief moved through me so suddenly I had to steady against the frame. Footsteps behind. Eleanor's reflection appeared in the cracked mirror, pearls bright against her throat. "We tried to keep the room untouched," she said, voice brittle porcelain, "but Charles thought it best to clear reminders." She met my eyes in the glass. Were we so cruel? I faced her fully. Cruelty is not measured by bruises alone. Sometimes it is measured by silence. She flinched. "We were young," she offered, as though youth files absolution. I lifted the toy plane between us. I was younger. Her shoulders sagged. "What now?" The question trembled with genuine fear. I thought of Olivia's tears, of Margaret's averted gaze, of Halliday's whispered Master Jacob. My vengeance felt suddenly heavy, as if each document I had signed was a brick added to a pyre that might scorch everyone, not just the architects of my orphanhood. Yet memory resurfaced. Sister Judith's lantern, the rain-soaked promise to carve my name in stone. I could not drop the chisel now. "Now," I said, "you prepare for Monday." I slipped the plane into my coat pocket, turned, and left her in the half-light of forgotten choices. Outside, storm clouds bruised the horizon. Lightning flared, illuminating banners along the drive bearing the Winthrop crest, a lion guarding a key. I whispered to the air. The lion never noticed the cage door rusting. Thunder answered like distant applause. Back at headquarters, I drafted final directives, transfer patents to my holding, foreclose on vineyard liens, trigger default clauses in Victor's rescue loan. Each signature felt like tapping nails into a coffin long overdue for closure. Yet Olivia's face hovered between lines, a phantom plea. I quelled it with the memory of cold dormitory sheets and the sound of other boys being chosen while I stared at the ceiling's map of cracks. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I remember you running through the orchard, laughing. Please talk to me before you finish this." The sender's initials, OW. I powered off the phone, heart thudding like rain on old tin. Vengeance is frost, I reminded myself, and frost cannot hesitate when dawn approaches. I sealed the last envelope, stamped it with the company seal. Outside, streetlights shimmered through steady drizzle, each droplet a bead on the rosary of my resolve. Monday waited with its altar of reckoning. Until then, silence would be my prayer, memory my blade. I locked the office and stepped into the rain, coat collar high, toy plane heavy in my pocket. Proof that even broken wings can remember how to fly. Monday dawned the colour of bruised steel. I arrived at headquarters before the first espresso hissed through the lobby cafe, carrying a briefcase that weighed less than the gravity in my chest. The boardroom, prepared for the investor briefing, gleamed with crystal water pitchers and optimism the staff had been told to project. I dimmed the lights until the room felt like a theatre awaiting a tragedy nobody had rehearsed. By 8, the Winthrops filed in. Charles wore a power suit that could not hide the twitch at his jaw. Victor stalked like a cornered wolf. Margaret clutched a tiny silver crucifix. Olivia entered last, her eyes red-rimmed yet steady, as though she had braided resolve into her hair during the night. Outside, guests arrived next. Bankers, fund managers, minor shareholders, faces glossy with curated confidence. They greeted Charles as Sir, shook my hand as Mr. Lawson, and took seats facing the polished screen where my presentation waited. I inhaled, exhaled, and pressed the remote. Slides blossomed, balance sheets, flowcharts, waterfall graphs, tidy choreography of numbers spelled out in soothing blues and greens. Voices murmured approval. Then slide 12 appeared, and the room stilled. The title read, Transfer of Controlling Interest, Immediate Execution. Beneath, a single line of legalese named the recipient, Jacob W. Lawson Trust, accompanied by my original birth certificate as appendix. Charles half rose, crimson flooding his cheeks. This is fraudulent, I spoke calmly. Every document is notarized, every signature yours. You empowered me to act. I acted. I advanced to slide 13, Olivia's vineyard sale contracts, Victor's loan defaults, Margaret's silent partnership clauses, all now funneled into the trust. A low buzz rippled among the investors. They recognized inevitability when they smelled it. Charles pounded the table. You vulture! You disgrace to this family! His spit dotted the mahogany like tiny meteors. I waited for my pulse to race, but it beat slow, deliberate, like a judge's gavel. I was disgraced the day you wrote a donation check instead of a father's name, I said. Olivia stood. Father, stop! Tears glimmered, but her voice cut glass. We did this. We pushed him away. Margaret reached for her, whispering a prayer, yet Olivia shook free. Jacob? She used my true name, and it shivered through the air. What happens now? I clicked to the final slide, an aerial photograph of the Winthrop estate. Red lines marked parcels, main house, guest cottages, the orchard, even the tiny gardener's shed. All bore the caption, Property of Lawson Trust, effective immediately. Gasps filled the boardroom like rising water. I closed the laptop. You may remain in the residence for 90 days while you arrange relocation, a courtesy, not an obligation. Victor lunged across the table, fist cocked, but security stepped forward. He stopped, chest heaving, eyes wet with rage, and something perilously close to shame. Silence settled, broken only by the whisper of paper, as Charles tore a printed deed in half. Fragments drifted like confetti of defeat. He sank back into his chair, shoulders slumped under the sudden weight of powerlessness. I gathered my folders. This meeting is adjourned. Investors slipped out, murmuring condolences they would later translate into profitable alliances. Winthrops remained, pale pillars in a collapsing temple. Olivia's voice followed me to the door. Jacob, please, talk to me. I did not turn. The door latched behind me with the soft finality of a switched-off heartbeat. Halliday waited in the hallway, holding an envelope sealed with red wax. Found in the archives, addressed to Master Jacob, he murmured. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside, my mother's handwriting flowed across a single page. If the day comes when you read this, remember, mercy is a blade sharper than vengeance. Spare whom you can, forgive whom you must, but never forget who you are. Tears blurred the ink. I folded the letter, slipped it into my breast pocket beside the toy plane, and walked toward the elevator. The ascent to the rooftop felt like rising through layers of old, cold water into sunlight. The door opened onto a terrace overlooking the river. Clouds parted, revealing a scrap of blue sky. I leaned against the railing, letter warm against my heart, and realized the empire I had captured felt less like a crown and more like a chain of iron memories. The question was no longer whether I could take everything from the Winthrops, but whether I could lay any of it down. Behind me, the terrace door clicked. Olivia stepped out, wind tugging her coat. "Jacob, you win," she said softly. "Now what?" The river below glittered, waiting for my answer. The Winthrop house greeted dusk with shutters drawn, as though bracing for an eclipse. 90 days of grace had shrunk to one final night. Moving trucks idled beyond the iron gate, engines humming the prelude to exile. I arrived unannounced, crossing the foyer where chandeliers still flickered out their last bravado. Charles was in the study, packing books into crates. He looked up, eyes hollowed by sleepless resignation. "Come to gloat," he rasped. I shook my head. "To finish." I set a thin folder on his desk. Deed transfers, keys, security codes. At midnight, ownership reverts to me. Tomorrow the locks change. He sank into the leather chair that had once throned his arrogance. Fingers traced the folder's edge. "You pulverized our legacy," he whispered. "All for a childhood slight." Rage quickened in my veins, but I remembered my mother's letter. Mercy sharper than vengeance. "Not slight," I said. "Erasure. You deleted a life, my life, because I was inconvenient. I simply rewrote the ledger." He swallowed, throat working like a faltering gear. "Was I so monstrous?" I met his gaze. "You were a man who valued appearances over blood. History judges its own monsters." He closed his eyes, years folding across his face. "What will you do with this place?" "Turn the estate into a therapeutic camp for foster youth," I answered. Surprise cracked through his fatigue. "You'd give it away." "Not give," I corrected. "Invest in children who know the word forgotten better than their own names." Charles's shoulders quaked. Whether from shame or relief, I could not tell. I left him with his ghosts and climbed to the attic corridor where my old room stood vacant. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards, silvering dust into constellations. I placed the toy plane on the sill and whispered, "Home." The word no longer tasted of rust. Footsteps approached, soft, hesitant. Olivia appeared, clutching a small wooden box. "Mother asked me to give you this." She opened it, revealing a cameo portrait of my mother in her maid's uniform, eyes bright with hidden fire. Beside it lay a gold key. "Found in her jewelry drawer," Olivia explained. "She kept it all these years." I took the key, its weight vibrated with possibility. Engraved on the bow, Winthrop Orchard Tool Shed. My pulse quickened. "Thank you," I breathed, and meant it. Tears glimmered in her eyes. "Jacob, I cannot undo what they did, but I can choose different." She extended her hand. I wrapped mine around hers, warmth bridging decades of distance. Together we descended the back stairs, out through the dewy garden to the overgrown orchard where moonlit branches arched like cathedral vaults. The toolshed door creaked open. Dust motes danced in flashlight beams. Against the far wall stood an antique trunk, keyhole waiting like a parted mouth. The key slid home, turned with a sigh. Inside rested a leather satchel. I unbuckled it and drew out parchment deeds, acres of land purchased discreetly in my mother's name, some now worth fortunes. A letter lay atop. "My son, should the Winthrops ever forget you, let this remind you that worth does not flow from their name, but from your own. Build something better than the cage they offered." I sat on the earth floor, tears tracing heat down my cheeks. Olivia knelt beside me, silent witness to the quiet detonation of truth. My mother had been poor, but she had sown seeds of sovereignty for the day I might reclaim myself, not through fury, but through creation. The first birdsong of pre-dawn floated through the orchard. I stood, dusted off, and faced Olivia. "Help me manage these lands," I asked. She nodded, hope flickering where grief had camped. We sealed the trunk, carrying it into dawn as if it were a cradle instead of a casket. Back in the house, clock chimes announced midnight. Ownership transferred with the indifferent tick of a server in some offshore vault. Charles emerged at the top of the staircase, suitcase in hand, Eleanor beside him. He opened his mouth, but whatever curse or plea he carried withered when he saw Olivia standing by my side, her arm linked through mine. He descended slowly, handed me the folder I had left. "Good luck," he muttered. I caught a tremor of something like humility before he walked into the dying night, the doors shutting behind him with the hush of history closing a chapter. Sunrise painted the windows amber. I opened them wide, letting breeze sweep the stale perfume of entitlement into open sky. Halliday appeared with 2 mugs of coffee and a soft smile that said, "Welcome home." On the front lawn, movers loaded the last crate. I watched until the trucks vanished beyond the gates, then turned toward the empty corridors, echoing with potential. For the first time, the mansion felt neither trophy nor tomb. It felt like raw lumber waiting for new blueprints, new laughter, new children who would never again be numbers on a roster. Olivia touched my shoulder. "What now, Jacob?" I looked to the sun climbing above the orchard where my mother's legacy rooted deep in soil and promise. "Now," I said, voice steady as awakening earth, "we learn how to build instead of break." And in that golden hush, I realized the true inheritance was not the property nor the power, but the simple, indelible fact that I had reclaimed my own name, and with it, the freedom to choose mercy over memory's fracture. Somewhere I hoped my mother was smiling. The house exhaled, doors wide to the morning, as forgotten child and fractured family stepped into the day, carrying broken wings turned strong enough to fly.